The lunch rush had finally faded, leaving the restaurant wrapped in a weary kind of silence. The chatter of customers was gone, replaced only by the soft clinking of plates being washed in the back and the low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. The air still carried the faint scent of brewed coffee, melted butter, and freshly baked bread. For most people, that smell meant comfort. But for Amelia, it was the smell of another long day, another reminder that her dreams had been replaced by survival. She moved from table to table, collecting plates, stacking them carefully so they wouldn't clatter too loudly. The last thing she needed was her manager scolding her again for making noise. A few crumbs fell from a plate, and she brushed them into her hand absently before wiping the table down with her worn cloth. Her hands were small, but they told stories, calloused fingertips from endless hours of work, tiny cuts from broken glass and hot trays, and skin that had lost its softness long ago. Her uniform hung a little too loosely now, the navy blue fabric faded and frayed around the edges. She'd sewn the pocket twice to keep it from tearing completely. Her shoes, once black, had dulled into gray, their soles nearly smooth. Each step she took made a faint squeak against the tiled floor. Still, she smiled when she passed a customer, even if her back ached, even if her feet throbbed. She had mastered the art of smiling through pain, not the kind that came from sore muscles, but the kind that came from a heavy heart. Life, she thought, hadn't been fair to her. A few years ago, she was full of dreams. She had enrolled in culinary school, determined to become a pastry chef. She imagined opening her own bakery one day, a cozy little place filled with the scent of vanilla, sugar, and hope. But after her father passed away suddenly, everything changed. Bills piled up. Her mother's health declined. And one by one, her dreams were replaced with responsibilities. Now, instead of baking cakes with joy, she served them to people who didn't even look her in the eye. They called her Miss or sometimes just waved their fingers impatiently when they wanted a refill. To them, she was invisible, part of the background, like the tables or chairs. But Amelia never complained. She had too much pride to beg for pity and too much heart to lose her kindness. Every morning, before heading to work, she'd stop by her mother's room, help her take her medicine, and whisper, "I'll make things better, Mom. Just a little longer." Those words were her prayer, the promise that kept her going. Still, some nights, when she walked home after closing, her reflection in the dark shop windows made her pause. She'd look at herself, the tired eyes, the hair pulled into a messy bun, the smudged makeup, and wonder, when did I become this? The girl who once believed she could change the world now struggled just to make it through the day. Inside the restaurant, the ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. It was just past 3 in the afternoon. The slowest hour. Amelia leaned against the counter for a moment, taking a deep breath. The faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant laughter of a few remaining customers drifted through the room. She looked out the large front window. Outside, sunlight danced on the pavement, catching on the glass of passing cars. People hurried by, businessmen with phones pressed to their ears, mothers pushing strollers, teenagers laughing as they shared ice cream cones. The world was moving forward. And she felt stuck. Yet deep down, a small flicker of hope still burned, quiet, fragile, but alive. She didn't know how, but she believed that somehow, all her hard work, all her long nights, all her silent prayers would lead somewhere. She just had to keep going. So she picked up her rag again, forced another smile, and whispered to herself, "It's just another day, Amelia. You can do this." And as the doorbell chimed softly behind her, announcing another customer, she stood tall, straightened her faded apron, and went back to doing what she did best, giving the world her kindness, even when the world gave her nothing in return. As Amelia cleared a table near the big window, she caught the faint sound of something that didn't belong to the usual restaurant rhythm, a soft, broken sob. It was so quiet she almost thought she imagined it, but then she heard it again. A small, trembling sound, full of loneliness. She turned her head and saw him, a little boy sitting alone in the far corner booth. His small shoulders were hunched, his hands pressed to his face as silent tears slipped through his fingers. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. His dark hair was neatly combed, his shoes polished to a shine, and the jacket folded beside him looked expensive. But none of that mattered, he looked utterly heartbroken. For a moment, Amelia just stood there, frozen between duty and instinct. She knew the restaurant's rules. Waitresses weren't supposed to get personal with customers, especially unsupervised kids. But something in that boy's quiet sobbing cut right through her. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind of cry that came from deep inside, the kind that only happened when someone felt forgotten. She glanced around. No adult seemed to be looking his way. The tables near him were empty. So she made a choice, not as a waitress, but as a human being. Gently, Amelia walked toward him. Her tired feet moved quietly, the squeak of her worn shoes softened on the polished floor. She stopped beside his table, crouched down so her eyes were level with his, and spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said, her tone kind and warm. "Are you okay?" The boy didn't answer at first. He sniffled and tried to hide his face, embarrassed to be seen crying. Amelia waited patiently, her expression calm and gentle. Finally, he peeked through his fingers, his eyes red and wet. His voice came out shaky, small, and full of heartbreak. "My dad said he'd be back before lunch," he stammered. "But it's been hours. I think he forgot." Those words hit Amelia like a wave. She felt her chest tighten as she looked at him, so young, so lost. She remembered being little herself, waiting by the window for her father to come home before he passed away. That same ache, that same hollow waiting, echoed in her memory. Without thinking twice, Amelia pulled a napkin from her pocket and gently dabbed the tears from his cheeks. "He didn't forget," she said softly, trying to steady her voice. "Sometimes grown-ups get caught up in things. But they always come back." The boy looked up at her, his lip trembling. "You think so?" "I know so," she said, giving him a reassuring smile. "You see that clock?" She pointed toward the wall. "It's still daytime. There's plenty of time for good things to happen." He blinked, staring at the clock like it might somehow tell him the truth. Then, slowly, the corners of his mouth twitched into a tiny, hesitant smile. Amelia felt something in her heart shift. She didn't know who the boy's father was or what story lay behind those tears, but in that small, quiet moment, it didn't matter. The restaurant, the noise, the world outside, all of it faded until it was just the two of them, a weary waitress and a forgotten little boy finding comfort in kindness. Amelia's heart ached as she watched the boy's trembling hands clutch the napkin she had given him. He looked so small against the large booth, swallowed up by the world around him. The other customers laughed, sipped their coffee, and chatted about their busy lives, too busy to notice the quiet sorrow sitting just a few feet away. But Amelia noticed. She couldn't ignore the pain of a child. She stood there for a moment, torn between her duties and her heart. The restaurant's manager was somewhere in the back office, and if he saw her spending too long with one table, she'd probably get scolded again. But Amelia had never been the kind of person who could walk away from someone in need. So she took a breath, turned toward the counter, and poured a small cup of hot chocolate. She even added whipped cream on top, a luxury she usually wasn't allowed to give away. The warmth from the cup seeped into her fingers as she carried it back to his table. She set it down gently in front of him. "There you go," she said softly. "It's my favorite on a tough day." The boy looked up, startled. "For me?" he asked, his voice a little steadier now. Amelia smiled and whispered playfully, "Don't tell my boss, okay? It'll be our little secret." A tiny laugh escaped him, the first sound of joy she'd heard from him. It was faint, but it was enough to make her heart swell. He took a small sip, the steam fogging his lashes for a moment. "It's really good," he said quietly, and then, almost shyly, "Thank you." Amelia smiled again, resting her hand lightly on the edge of the table. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You know, when I was your age, I used to think hot chocolate could fix everything." The boy tilted his head, curious. "Did it?" She chuckled softly. "Not always. But it helped me remember that even when things felt bad, there was still something warm and sweet left in the world." He looked down at his cup, stirring it slowly. "I wish my dad didn't have to work all the time. He's always so busy. I don't think he likes being around me anymore." Those words pierced Amelia deeper than she expected. She knelt beside him again so they were eye to eye. "Hey," she said gently, "don't ever think that. Sometimes parents have to do things that make them seem far away, but that doesn't mean they don't care. Maybe he's working hard because he loves you." The boy didn't answer right away. His eyes shimmered with tears again, but this time they didn't fall. He just nodded slowly. Amelia reached for a pen and one of the restaurant's napkins. She began to draw quick, funny doodles, a lopsided cat, a superhero with a frying pan, a steaming mug with a smiley face. The boy giggled quietly. "What's that one?" he asked, pointing. "That," Amelia said, "is Hot Chocolate Man, the hero who saves sad people with marshmallows and whipped cream." The boy laughed, a real laugh this time, the kind that echoed softly, pure and full of light. And for that moment, everything else, the bills waiting at home, the ache in her back, the exhaustion of her endless shifts, all of it disappeared. There was only this little boy, his laughter, and the fragile peace they had both found in each other's company. Finally, she asked, "What's your name, sweetheart?" He wiped his nose with the napkin and said, "Liam." "Liam," she repeated, smiling. "That's a strong name. You know what it means?" He shook his head. "It means protector," she said softly. "And you know what? I think you're braver than you realize." The boy looked at her for a long moment, and then his lips curved into a shy smile. "I like your name too, Miss Amelia. It sounds like an angel's name." Amelia's breath caught. She laughed softly to hide the emotion welling up in her chest. "You've got quite the charm, young man." For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as someone struggling to survive, but as a human being who could still make a difference. "There you go," she said softly. "It's my favorite on a tough day." The boy looked up, startled. "For me?" he asked, his voice a little steadier now. Amelia smiled and whispered playfully, "Don't tell my boss, okay? It'll be our little secret." A tiny laugh escaped him, the first sound of joy she'd heard from him. It was faint, but it was enough to make her heart swell. He took a small sip, the steam fogging his lashes for a moment. "It's really good," he said quietly, and then, almost shyly, "Thank you." Amelia smiled again, resting her hand lightly on the edge of the table. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You know, when I was your age, I used to think hot chocolate could fix everything." The boy tilted his head, curious. "Did it?" She chuckled softly. "Not always. But it helped me remember that even when things felt bad, there was still something warm and sweet left in the world." He looked down at his cup, stirring it slowly. "I wish my dad didn't have to work all the time. He's always so busy. I don't think he likes being around me anymore." Those words pierced Amelia deeper than she expected. She knelt beside him again so they were eye to eye. "Hey," she said gently, "don't ever think that. Sometimes parents have to do things that make them seem far away, but that doesn't mean they don't care. Maybe he's working hard because he loves you." The boy didn't answer right away. His eyes shimmered with tears again, but this time they didn't fall. He just nodded slowly. Amelia reached for a pen and one of the restaurant's napkins. She began to draw quick, funny doodles, a lopsided cat, a superhero with a frying pan, a steaming mug with a smiley face. The boy giggled quietly. "What's that one?" he asked, pointing. "That," Amelia said, "is Hot Chocolate Man, the hero who saves sad people with marshmallows and whipped cream." The boy laughed, a real laugh this time, the kind that echoed softly, pure and full of light. And for that moment, everything else, the bills waiting at home, the ache in her back, the exhaustion of her endless shifts, all of it disappeared. There was only this little boy, his laughter, and the fragile peace they had both found in each other's company. Finally, she asked, "What's your name, sweetheart?" He wiped his nose with the napkin and said, "Liam." "Liam," she repeated, smiling. "That's a strong name. You know what it means?" He shook his head. "It means protector," she said softly. "And you know what? I think you're braver than you realize." The boy looked at her for a long moment, and then his lips curved into a shy smile. "I like your name too, Miss Amelia. It sounds like an angel's name." Amelia's breath caught. She laughed softly to hide the emotion welling up in her chest. "You've got quite the charm, young man." For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as someone struggling to survive, but as a human being who could still make a difference. The late afternoon sun spilled through the restaurant windows, painting soft amber streaks across the tables. The once busy place had grown calm again. A few customers lingered, sipping coffee, scrolling their phones, lost in their own little worlds. Amelia glanced at the clock, almost 5. Her shift would end soon, though she still had another hour of cleaning ahead. But her eyes kept drifting to the corner booth. Liam was tracing shapes on the window with his finger, his half-empty cup of hot chocolate beside him. He seemed calmer now, the crying had stopped, but every few minutes his gaze flickered toward the door, hopeful, expectant, waiting. Amelia's heart twisted with sympathy. She remembered that kind of waiting, sitting by the window as a child, clutching her father's old cap, listening for footsteps that never came. Waiting wasn't just painful, it was heavy. It pressed down on your chest until you couldn't breathe. She wiped a nearby table and watched him. "You okay, champ?" she asked gently. He nodded, but his voice came out small. "I think maybe he's not coming." Amelia crouched beside him again, placing a hand lightly on the table. Sometimes grown-ups get stuck doing things they don't want to do. But I promise, no dad forgets his little boy. He gave her a half-hearted smile, but his eyes stayed glued to the door. And then, the door burst open. A tall man in a dark gray suit rushed in, his tie slightly loosened, his hair ruffled as if he'd run all the way there. His eyes scanned the restaurant with desperate urgency until they landed on the small figure in the corner. "Liam," he called out, his voice cracking with relief. The boy's head shot up. "Dad," he shouted, leaping from the booth. He ran across the floor, nearly tripping over his own feet before crashing into the man's open arms. The restaurant went silent for a moment. A few customers looked up, smiling softly as they watched the reunion. The man knelt, holding Liam tight. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with guilt. "The meeting ran longer than I expected. I came as fast as I could." Liam buried his face in his father's shoulder, sobbing again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of relief. Amelia stood a few feet away, her hands clasped before her, watching quietly. The scene warmed her heart. There was something sacred about moments like this, the kind of love that couldn't be bought or faked. When the man finally stood, he noticed her. His eyes softened as he looked at the tired waitress standing nearby, the one who had clearly been watching over his son. "You took care of him?" he asked, stepping closer. Amelia nodded, suddenly shy. "He was just a little upset. I couldn't let him sit alone like that. The man's gaze drifted to the empty cup on the table, the whipped cream smudged along the rim, the doodled napkin lying beside it with cartoon drawings. Something in his expression shifted, a mixture of gratitude and astonishment. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice sincere. Most people wouldn't have stopped to help. Amelia gave a modest smile. "He's a good kid. He just needed someone to remind him that people care." The man's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer. Then he extended his hand. "I'm Daniel. Daniel Cole." She shook it, still unaware of what that name meant. "I'm Amelia." Before she could say anything more, a nervous voice interrupted from behind the counter. "Mr. Cole," her manager blurted, practically tripping over himself as he hurried forward. His tone had changed completely, trembling, eager to please. "Sir, I didn't realize you'd arrived." Amelia turned, confused. "Sir?" Daniel smiled faintly. "It's all right, Mark. I was just here to pick up my son." Her manager's face turned pale. "Oh, of course, sir. I just didn't know." But Daniel raised a hand gently, silencing him. Then he looked back at Amelia. "You didn't know, did you?" he asked softly. She blinked. "Know what?" He smiled, calm, humble, but unmistakably confident. "I own this restaurant." Amelia's breath caught. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked between Daniel, her manager, and the restaurant around her, the one she'd been serving in for months, always dreaming of something better. And now, standing before her, was the man who owned it all, the father of the boy she had comforted without hesitation. For a moment, she didn't know whether to speak, apologize, or run. But Daniel's expression held no anger, only warmth. The air between them filled with quiet awe, as if kindness itself had revealed something divine. For a long moment, Amelia just stood there, frozen. The sounds of the restaurant faded, the clinking glasses, the hum of the espresso machine, the faint jazz playing through the speakers. All she could hear was the echo of Daniel's words. "I own this restaurant." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She'd spoken to him like any other customer, unaware that the man she'd comforted his son for was the very person signing her paychecks. 1,000 thoughts flooded her mind, fear that she had crossed a line, that she might be in trouble for spending too much time at one table. But then Daniel smiled, not the smile of a boss, but of a father who had just witnessed something profoundly human. "Amelia," he said softly, "you didn't just watch over my son, you reminded him that the world still has kind people. That means more than you know." Her throat tightened. "I just couldn't stand seeing him cry," she murmured, her voice trembling. He looked so alone. Daniel nodded slowly, still studying her face. There was no judgment in his eyes, only gratitude. Most people would have walked past. "You didn't. That tells me everything I need to know." Her manager, Mark, hovered awkwardly behind them, his fake smile plastered across his face. "Sir, Amelia's one of our newer servers. She's hard-working," he added quickly, as if scrambling to sound supportive. Daniel turned slightly, his tone calm but firm. "Hard-working? That's an understatement." He looked back at Amelia. "Tell me, how long have you been here?" "Almost a year," she replied quietly. "I'm saving up for culinary school, but it's been slow." Something flickered in his eyes. "Culinary school?" She nodded, embarrassed. "I've always loved cooking. My mom taught me everything. I want to create food that makes people feel cared for, like home. But right now, it's just not possible." There was a moment of silence. Daniel looked around the restaurant, at the tables she'd cleaned, the customers she'd served, the warm energy she brought into a place that often ran on stress and indifference. Then his gaze returned to her, steady and thoughtful. "You know," he said finally, we've been looking for a new assistant chef. Someone who actually cares about the people we serve, not just the food." Her eyes widened. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified." He held up a hand gently. "You're more qualified than you think. Skill can be taught. Compassion can't." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. She shook her head in disbelief, covering her mouth with one trembling hand. "You're serious?" Daniel smiled softly. "Completely." He looked at Liam, who was now beaming proudly beside him. "What do you think, buddy? Should we bring Miss Amelia into the kitchen?" Liam nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. She's the nicest person here." The restaurant staff watched in stunned silence as Amelia wiped her tears, her heart pounding with joy and disbelief. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll take the job," Daniel said kindly. "And maybe, have dinner with us tonight." Off the clock. For the first time in months, Amelia laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that carried the sound of relief. "Okay," she said through her tears. "Yes. I'll take it." As the sun dipped lower outside, golden light filled the restaurant. Daniel and Liam sat with her at the same booth where the boy had once cried, now sharing a meal that felt like the start of something beautiful. Amelia looked at them, her heart full. She had spent so long serving others quietly, never expecting anything in return. But that day, her kindness came back to her, multiplied, overflowing. Sometimes, the smallest acts, a napkin offered, a soft word, a moment of care, become the turning points of a life. And for Amelia, it wasn't just the day she met her boss. It was the day she was seen, valued, and finally given a chance to chase her dream again. Because when you lead with kindness, life always finds a way to reward your heart. Yellow heart. Moral. Kindness doesn't always pay you back the way you expect. Sometimes, it rewards you in ways you could never imagine.